have I got an episode for you today, and it's about workplace conflict, and it comes hot off the back of new research by UC Berkeley Professor Juliana Schroeder and colleagues Brent Bevis and Mike Yeomans. And they found across several studies that when people disagree, speaking versus writing tends to lead to more constructive conversations. Who knew? But interestingly, people don't necessarily expect this. When they anticipate a disagreement or conflict, most people prefer to write. And in one study, 84% chose to write and 7% prefer to just speak. So if you're among those who avoid talking through a disagreement and conflict, then this is the episode for you, because we're joined by organisational psychologist Dr. Liane Davey. Well, hello there. Welcome to Manage with Confidence with me, your host, Dr. Hayley Lewis. Each episode, I'll explore common issues that people managers like you often grapple with. For example, giving negative feedback or keeping your team motivated during change, or maybe you're trying to manage people with diverse needs. I'm here with you, giving you support when you need it so that you can manage with confidence. So sit back, grab a cuppa and find out what to expect from today's episode. Liane, welcome to Manage with Confidence.
Thanks, Hayley.
Now, Liane is a New York Times bestselling author with 4 books, including You First, The Good Fight, and her newest book, Thoughtload, Manage the Madness and Free Your Team to Do Great Work, which is out, so go get your copy. She's a frequent contributor to Harvard Business Review, and she's often called on by the media for her experience in leadership and team effectiveness. As the co-founder of 3Cos Inc., she advises companies such as Amazon, UNICEF, and TD Bank. Liane has a PhD in organisational psychology, and I'm absolutely over the moon to get Liane on my show, as I've been a huge fan of hers for years. She shares a great deal of wisdom, underpinned with brilliant humour on her LinkedIn. And if you're not following her on LinkedIn, go and sort that out now.
I've been girlfriending you for a long time. Been a newsletter subscriber since day one. So yeah, it's very mutual. I've been very much looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. Giddy with excitement. So let's get into it. I've got so many questions. So I know you have your new book, Thoughtload, but I want to jump back to your previous book, The Good Fight. And in that, you talk about conflict actually being important for organisations and that it's the fuel for great teams. So tell us a bit more about that and why it's important.
Let's start with the definition. So if I just take a Merriam-Webster definition, conflict is the struggle between incompatible and opposing needs, wishes, and demands. And the reason I think conflict is so essential to organizations is that we face incompatible and opposing needs, wishes, and demands 10 times before 10 a.m. So the problem is, if we aren't comfortable with conflict, if we avoid conflict, those really difficult trade-offs, those things we have to wrestle with to optimize a situation, we just lose those opportunities. And either we are conflict avoidant, so we back away and come up with a meh suboptimal decision, or we are sort of aggressive and we force our will on others. Both of those get us over the mid and long term a much worse outcome. So we need to learn to be good at conflict so we can get through that struggle, not avoid it, and optimize incompatible needs, wishes, and demands.
Okay. And in your book, you share some brilliant data about the cost of avoiding conflict, that you talk about conflict debt.
Yeah.
Which I was really interested in. And it's not something I'd heard before until I read your book. So for listeners, what is conflict debt and why do they need to understand it?
Yeah. So if you think about what I just said, our organizations require us to move through and make these hard trade-offs and confront these difficult conflicts. If we add the second half of the research, which is that as humans, we've evolved for 15,000 years to cooperate and go along with our in-group. And as we learn more and more, actually, the neuroscience has evolved even since I published The Good Fight to understanding concepts like social pain. So as we start to understand our wiring and even how we're socialized, you realize we tend to run away from conflict. So if you put those two things together, Our organizations are piling up more and more conflicts we need to have, put that together with, we're running the other direction. I had to coin a term for it so it could be more visceral: conflict debt. And just imagining that balance like you have on a credit card that's piling up and you're paying interest and penalties and you're getting trapped under it. That's what happens if we don't have the conflict. So when I look at the impact of getting into conflict debt, we can look at it at multiple levels. For an organization that avoids conflict and gets into conflict debt, we see real erosion of return on investment. You try and dilute your resources across too many things, and so nothing actually pays off. We don't get forward momentum. So there's sort of organizational costs of conflict debt. There's team costs, because if we don't deal with the frictions building up in our teams and between people, we erode trust, engagement suffers. So there's sort of team costs. And then, of course, there's very personal costs, which is if you sit in grievance, if you allow resentment to poison you, that goes home with you. That is with you at the dinner table. It really detracts from your presence at the dinner table. And we know stress and burnout and various other really worrisome things are happening because I think we're getting into conflict debt. The Sunday Scaries is a great example where on Sunday night, we know, okay, we can't avoid this any longer. It's all going to come to roost on Monday. And so about 47% of people have sleep disruption and anxiety on Sunday night because of the conflict debt they're in that they're going to have to face the next day. So many costs of getting into conflict debt.
It just popped into my head. There's so many studies about the impact of conflict and workplace incivility and the impact on our home lives. So we can start to see conflict at home. But yeah, there's so many studies about the impact on our sleep. And it almost becomes a vicious cycle because I don't know about you, I struggle to deal with even the simplest of life's challenges when I'm sleep deprived.
Oh, yeah.
Alone, leaning into potentially challenging conversations or situations which can feel a bit like, I've got one client I'm working with and they feel like they're about to step on a landmine.
That's such an evocative image, right? That's what it feels like. Yeah.
It always makes me, they've kind of stepped on that plate and now they can't move, which kind of taps into the fight flight that you were talking about at the start.
Yeah.
In your experience of working with different leaders, different teams, what are the steps that you have found managers can take to feel less frightened of conflict, lean into it and work with it?
Yeah, I love that. So let's do 3 pieces. So the first is understanding the difference between productive and unproductive conflict. And I would describe productive conflict as tension. So it's a stretch. So one of the problems is that we tend to decide whether something's a good idea or not by whether it's painful. And unfortunately, because of the way we're wired and because of social pain, all conflict is painful, even the good stuff. So we can't use that as a measure. So what I say is you have to determine, is it the good pain like yoga? It's like, this is hurting, but I know I'm going to be stronger and more agile afterward. If you think about yoga, it's a stretch. That's the first thing I want managers to think about. Where is conflict? Where does it come from? Differences in perspectives, differences in stakeholders. Where is conflict a stretch? And differentiate that from the unproductive form of conflict that's more like a blister, where the pain comes from friction. I'm not listening. I'm wearing myself down. So the first exercise that I encourage managers to do is map out the productive tensions that should be in the room. So how do different roles in the room have different expertise or experience? What are they paying attention to that's different from one another? The person in the room who's a salesperson is paying attention to different things and bringing something different than the marketing person or the operations person. So how do we understand it? How do we understand which stakeholders different people are representing? And as we come to understand the different perspectives of people in the room, we can map out the tensions that help us make an optimal decision. Disagreeing, diverging from one another is going to help us be stronger and better versus the behaviors that are going to cause us to pull back or feel alienated or that sort of thing. So step 1, mapping out the tensions you want. So that's the first thing. Reframing conflict as a good thing, not a bad thing. Second thing, we need to build skills. There's a lot of skills we need to build. I would start with listening skills. And usually the most important thing is to help people understand that listening to facts and information is not going to resolve any conflict. Teaching people to listen even through the emotional layer and get down to what do they value? What do they believe? What's important? In the new book, I use the expression when the dragon's breathing fire, it's because they're protecting treasure. So when we're in a conflict, it's not usually about the facts. It's about there's treasure here and the person feels that their treasure is under threat. So learning to listen. So there's a whole set of skills, but I'd say that's the second piece. And the final piece is we have to move away from conflict as an event, as a steel myself, grit my teeth, clench my sphincter kind of event, because then we're just not going to do it very often because it's too taxing. We have to move to it as a habit. So the other way I talk about it is we want conflict to be like flossing, not like root canal. So how do we start to use tools to make conflict part of our everyday routines? And so those are the three pieces. Change the mindset and make the case for why productive tension is important. Build the skill set so that we can do it less clumsily, more deftly. And then even if we have people able to take the high road and have the conflict, it's going to wear them down. So we want to move to having conflict as a habit. So those are the three pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah. I mean, I'm loath to overcomplicate stuff because my whole MO and my approach is trying to simplify things as much as possible. However, the thing that's going through my mind now, Liane, and I'm really interested in your thoughts on this, is even just the word conflict, because it's so rooted in war.
Yeah.
We've all got memories and we watched news. My first degree was history and my specialist area was World War II.
Oh, that's why we get along.
Yeah.
I'm a huge World War II history fiend, like every podcast ever.
Yeah. So even just by dint of the word conflict, we're kind of shields up. And I'm just curious about your thoughts on that.
It's a
We need
great
to call it something
provocation.
else.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I was with a group years and years ago, I think even before The Good Fight came out, and somebody kind of raised their hand and they're like, could we just call it debate or something? And my response was a bit cheeky, but basically like, you can call it whatever you want. But my guess is if you can't even say the word conflict, then we're probably in trouble, right? So it is always a choice. Do we want to use euphemisms that make us more comfortable and perhaps make it a little, lubricate the process, make it a little easier? Or do we want to come at it and say quite directly, conflict is associated with all those things in your brain at a pre-conscious level. So let's admit that this is something difficult, that this is something contrary to much of our wiring. Because if we don't start by admitting that, we're going to underdo the challenge. We're going to not do sufficient work to get over the hump. So I am very open to the thought that this language is going to, particularly in some organizations, be a non-starter. It's one of the reasons I think why I've started using tension and friction, because productive tension, people seem more comfortable with. I'm totally fine with that. But ask yourself, if you're reacting to the word, great, what can you learn from that? What is your baggage about the word conflict? And are those messages, are those old tapes that are playing in your head serving you? So I would say lean into the discomfort with the term. And then if you've done that hard work, I'm totally fine with you moving to calling it tension versus friction. But yeah, it is an interesting thought.
It's interesting to me how the language of physics or engineering comes in. My other guest interview, so episode 2 with another psychologist, Caroline Katz, we talked about feedback and feedback conversations because that's her specialist area. And she says sometimes she's not so sure about using the phrase feedback because that has real kind of process. There's a linear, step-by-step, very mechanical engineering approach. And then hearing tension and friction, I instantly think of physics.
I think that's why I went to something like that, because I wanted to get to the visceral embodiment of this experience. And I wanted to come at the idea that all conflict is painful for human beings. Like we are just literally wired to experience it as pain. And the social pain fMRI research is so interesting. So I wanted to say, all right, but now imagine the difference between how it feels in your body to have an uncomfortable stretch. And it's at once uncomfortable. And at the same time, there's something a little satisfying about it. You're like, oh, that hurts so good, right? versus friction and a blister. Like, there is nothing good about it. So I wanted to move to those much more visceral expressions so that people could recognize it in their bodies. I think with a lot of this, we're way up in our heads all the time. And embodiment is really important if we're going to cope with how emotional conflict is, how many false stories go on with our nasty narrators when we're getting into conflict. So it felt important to bring in something much more visceral.
Well, and it's very personal for me as well, because when I was a teenager, I had a really big blister on the back of my heel. I used to play a lot of hockey.
Yeah.
My shoes were too tight. Didn't tell mum and dad. I just ignored it. I remember becoming really ill because it had become septic. I remember being taken to hospital because I had to have hospital treatment. That's quite a visceral.
But it's so perfect.
Yeah.
How many of us have, the analog to that at work right now?
Yeah.
It's some kind of a blister that has emerged with another colleague, with someone, and we just keep muscling through. We just keep going, and we don't realize it's toxic, right? And we don't realize because for a while it doesn't take you down, and then all of a sudden you're on IV drip at the A&E because you were.
Yes. So that kind of poison goes into the system, and then you need to bring in an expert to help.
Yeah, exactly.
And in an organizational context, that might be a facilitator or a coach, and that costs money.
It is so costly when you let that happen, right? Because your productivity as a team goes way down. Passive aggressiveness goes up, where you think you've landed a decision, but it never gets implemented because people are just waiting, and you get in the agree to disagree downward spiral where nothing happened. Like, it's really costly even before you start trying to fix it. And then when you try and fix it, in my experiences, for the most part, if that has happened, if something has turned septic in your team, you won't get through it without at least changing one team member. So then you're paying severance costs, you're recruiting new people. It is extremely costly.
Yeah. So one of the things I think, and this came up in the episodes on feedback.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I found over the years is that managers will almost play the movie in their head of how they think it's going to play out. And more often than not, it's a horror movie that they're playing.
Yeah, exactly.
And I imagine that with kind of this notion of conflict at work, which can show up in an array of ways. What ways would you suggest to people because I imagine they're playing through that it's going to get heated and out of control. Mm-hmm. So what are your kind of favourite strategies for de-escalating a heated disagreement?
Yeah.
Bringing it back to productive conflict.
So I go back to the dragon metaphor.
Yeah.
Okay. So if the dragon's breathing fire, it's because they're protecting treasure. So first of all, understanding before you go in, there's likely to be some fire. So that's not going to surprise me. Have you ever done an amusement park ride the first time and something like, I went to Harry Potter World and they do have a fire-breathing dragon at Gringotts. And the first time it happens, you jump out of your skin. It is terrifying, right? But then you ride the second time, you're like, oh, they're not getting me this time. I know around this corner, this thing's going to breathe fire. And the second time you still jump out of your skin. The third time it's getting better. So if you can know that it's coming, it's not that aversive. You're like, oh, it's a dragon. It's going to breathe fire. So that's the first thing. Make sure that when you're playing it out, that's part of it, but take the horror movie out of it. It's watching the horror movie for the third time or the fourth time, not the first time. Then what you want to do to de-escalate is to acknowledge what they're experiencing and the threat that they're feeling and figure out what's the treasure they're protecting. So the best way to do that is not by building a wall of facts, which is what we tend to want to do. Go in with all of our, people who literally use this word, ammunition. That's not good. If you come toward the dragon with a grenade, it's not going to go well. So not building a wall of facts, not with your ammunition, but a different idea. If I'm trying to get them to draw me a map to their treasure, the first thing I need to do is get them to open the drawbridge. So preparing, not by playing out a horror film, but by figuring out what are some really great questions I can ask that will get them to open the drawbridge. So I have a tool for folks that is just a bunch of open drawbridge questions. What's at stake here? How are you imagining this playing out? What mistake am I about to make? Right? These kinds of questions that are kind of a blank piece of parchment that allow them to kind of draw you the map. Oh, this is about. So first thing, understand you're walking into fire. It's okay. Second thing, go prepared with some really good open drawbridge questions. Third thing, then you want to keep them talking and make them feel that you understand their treasure and validate that. So instead of disagreeing, contradicting, or just telling them, well, it'll be fine, don't be silly. Instead of that, going ready to actually say, all right, for you, this is about X, or you're imagining this playing out in a certain way. And then helping them reframe, helping them think different. What if we did this? How would it play out if X, Y, and Z? What would have to be true for you to be behind this plan? And so when you go in knowing that this is a fight because they have treasure that feels unsafe, that they're trying to protect, and probably they're using that fire to kind of divert you from what the actual treasure is. Yeah. When you go in ready for that, now let me give you the advanced class, one notch further. When you've done that, stop and realize you're a dragon too. And ask yourself the open drawbridge questions. This wouldn't be a fight if I wasn't also in the fight. I must be a dragon. And if I'm a dragon, what is going on for me? What story am I telling myself? How do I see this playing out? Those sorts of things. And if you can walk in first focusing on their treasure and validating that and having their treasure come out of your mouth first. But then if you can add in, let me share with you how I'm thinking about this. Or I think one of the reasons I'm digging in my heels is X. It's amazing how when you change this imagery in your head and get to understanding, they got treasure, I got treasure. We need an answer that keeps that treasure safe. So my task is to not let the fire throw me off, not to give up or either run away or fire back, but instead to figure out what's the treasure. When we change that paradigm, it is amazing how all of a sudden now it becomes two people on the same side of the desk trying to problem solve. Okay, if that's your treasure and that's mine, what are our options? What do we do? Yeah. So it's a major paradigm shift.
I love that advanced level.
Yeah. Oh, that's the hard part.
Well, one of my favorite questions to get managers to reflect on is, what part am I playing?
Yes.
In this. There's a senior leader I'm working with at the moment. They're a director in healthcare. And this is the second time I've worked with him over the last kind of 5 years. He said he still draws on that question now.
Yeah, of course, because it's the question.
It's fundamental. I'm not this kind of omnipotent being sat on a cloud, holier than thou. I'm part of this.
Yeah. And of course, as a leader, they're usually a huge and outsized part. The first place that the other dragon came to me is I like to give away 1 day a month for a cause that I believe in. And so I got asked to give the talk to a really amazing not-for-profit group that helps parents who have kids either involved with drugs or in the youth criminal justice system. So a very, very important organization doing very difficult work. And so we got talking about this, and the example came up about a kid throwing a tantrum in public. And so I asked them, what's their treasure? What's going on for them? And of course, it's often they want some control over something or whatever else. But the parents were acting as if the only issue in the situation was the child's behavior. And I said, well, okay, but let's recognize that if you weren't so worried about what the other people in the store were thinking about you and your kid and your parenting, obviously this woman has lost all control, right? That's your treasure. And if you didn't have that treasure, you would just let this temper tantrum blow out, right? You'd just be standing there bemused, right? Playing a quick game of Sudoku on your phone, letting this extinguish itself. But you don't, because you have treasure too. And it was the first place where I was like, okay, we got to stop just talking about everybody else as the dragon and recognize we're dragons too.
Absolutely. And I've got so many different dragons in my head. It can take us from being Smaug in The Hobbit, who's absolutely terrifying, to Peach Dragon.
Oh, that's what we want to be, right? We want conflict to be something that we can do when we need to. We want to have that little bit of dragon in us because there are so many stakeholders counting on us to fight for things. There are things worth fighting for. So we don't want to not be dragons when we need to be. But yeah, how can we be more in control, less intimidating, all of those sorts of things? So
Well, the other word that popped into my head when you were taking us through that masterclass, Liane, was I was sitting here thinking, this is at the heart of this is curiosity. Like, we need to be curious enough. And I don't know if you've listened to the new podcast from Brené Brown and Adam Grant.
I haven't yet.
Shop.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I know it will be.
This episode is an absolute masterclass in how to work through serious disagreement and conflict. I mean, they didn't talk for 4 years.
Yeah. It's funny. I wrote one of my really early blogs was about a disagreement between those two, like a decade ago at least. And so it's funny that it's now coming to...
And only just worked through it. And Adam says it in that first episode. He's like, I can't believe we're only just working it through now.
Yeah.
And
but that's how much
comfortable this needs to be.
I'm going to listen to it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I've told so many people about it.
Yeah. Curiosity, I agree with you. It changes everything in conflict. So I was with a group in Chicago yesterday, a very large construction company, and we brought somebody up to role play, like to take me through a situation. And it was a construction situation where, because of things the client did, there was a big delay. And so they were trying to get an increase in the fees to make up for this. And the person was fighting back. And so the guy is going in 4 days or whatever to meet with the client. And I was like, okay, take me through where you're at. And he just started with like making sure he had all his ducks in a row about everything the client needed to understand about why they were going to get more money. Like it was just completely my treasure. This is my treasure. I'm going to go tell. And I'm like, where's the curiosity about how he's experiencing this? And even asking questions like, who else do you know who knows him better than you do? Turns out it's a first-time client for the company. Nobody knows the person. Like, all right, who else do you know? Could you get some advice? Could you try and understand how this plays out? And it's so interesting because the default is not curiosity. It's sort of go in, assert my stance, and it's going to be adversarial, as opposed to if that call starts with, I'm sure you're in a difficult position. This has got you 11% behind schedule. You've exited the project manager, so you're having to like do a bunch of the stuff yourself. Tell me more about what you're experiencing, what's most important to you, what a good outcome would look like from here, like those sorts of things. So we got him ready to go on Monday and have a different conversation.
That's so interesting. It kind of makes me think there's something about the system, and by the system I mean workplaces.
Yeah.
And the pressure that managers feel to have all the answers because they're the most senior, because they're earning more money than their staff. I was in a coaching session with a client last week, and she is about to take her team through change, which throws up all sorts of conflict. She's been tying herself up in knots because she's trying to have all the answers to things. We stripped it right back to curiosity.
Yeah.
Which is, okay, state the facts of the change and then just ask them what they need from you.
Yeah, exactly.
Ask more questions, I would say. Well, I think that's just a good mantra for life, not just for work.
It is a great mantra for life. And it was fun for me to build the resource on the open drawbridge questions. And what I was trying to get at was questions that are like the little black dress of questions. You could like use them anywhere. They work everywhere. So yeah. And then some of my friends are just masters at questions. So Michael Bungay-Stanier is like the world's coaching question master. And my favorite one from him is, what are we pretending isn't true? I love that question. But Riaz Mendy, another friend, had one a couple of weeks ago that this one just stopped me in my tracks. The question was, what's the cost of being you? And I know I'm still processing that. So like a great question will create vulnerability, and a connection will really divert something from feeling like a fight to feeling like problem solving together. Getting your list of your good go-to questions, I would put it in like the manager's capsule wardrobe.
Absolutely. I mean, I always say the number one tool, which is in 2 parts that I think every manager needs, is a notebook and a pen.
Yeah.
I've got a notebook which is based on Richard Feynman's Things I Don't Know. So, and I'm constantly jotting kind of questions and stuff down. So, and I'm always encouraging managers to do that.
The other interesting thing about a pencil and pen, I'm sure you've noticed this facilitating conversations. If someone says something to you and you write it down, for some reason, it is this profound validation. And so, like, you might never look at that note again or whatever else, but the very act of somebody speaking and you being deliberate about saying, that's something I need to capture, will completely change the tenor of the conversation. And I've actually had situations where I'm facilitating at a flip chart and somebody says something that is a bit redundant or whatever, and I haven't written it. And I'll see their body language kind of deflate. And every once in a while, somebody will like, well, you didn't write my thing on the flip chart. And I was like, oh, my bad. Sorry, let me. But so we feel very validated. And we don't see that in the same way if you just like nod and There's something very tangible and concrete about, I'm going to write that in a notebook.
Yeah. It's being human, isn't it? We all want to be seen and heard in some way.
Exactly.
I hadn't thought of it like that. One of the things that comes up often in the work that I do with teams is around team norms. And these are the things, as you know, Liane, through your work, we just stop paying attention to them because they're norms. They're just these social norms and they become part of the fabric. But I found that when we stop paying attention to them, some of them, maybe that started off helpful, can start to be a hindrance. And so looking through the lens of kind of norms and systems and kind of rituals, what kind of things do you see teams who are able to navigate conflict? What kind of things do they have in place, such as norms and systems?
Yeah. One of them is that they don't close a discussion without seeking dissent, right? And there's lots of names for that, the black hat or the ninth man or there's a lot of different, call it whatever the heck you want. But our sense of urgency and our norms right now are very much rewarding rapid convergence. We think that a great team is one that gets to the point and is decisive and all of that. And so we need the teams that really get it have a sort of a ritual of okay, before we do that, what haven't we thought of? Which stakeholder would this not work for? What's the exception? There is something ritualistic about not closing without that little extra effort. It's you're working with a personal trainer and they're kind of like, can you do 10 reps? And you're like, yeah. And then they're like, can you do one more? And you're like, oh, yeah, I guess I can. And it's okay, we've been in the conflict and the trade-off of this decision. And now wait, have you got one more rep? Can we put one more tension on this? It's really important to do that. So you see that. Another one that I think is a real hygiene one, but sticking the landing. So it seems so silly, but so many times because conflict is very uncomfortable and even painful for us, if we think we've come to a resolution, we want to get the heck out of there as fast as we can. And the problem is we don't stick the landing. So to me, sticking the landing can be something as simple as one person has been noting the decisions, typing them into a computer, and then they project them so everyone can see them. And you go through and you're like, is there anything, did anybody have a different take on what we agreed there? Do we know what that word means? Who's on that and by when? And so if we don't do that, we tend to walk away with different perceptions of what we've agreed. And then we have this experience of feeling like everybody disappointed us or let us down because they didn't follow through. That's a great blister, right? That's just a completely unnecessary friction that if we'd taken the time to stick the landing, then we would have been better aligned. So little things like that. Also thinking about just that flossing version of just little tensions, because people will assert things. And often we have a norm that if someone just says something as if it's true, we just nod and move on. Great teams are like, okay, what are you basing that on? Where is that true and where would it not be true? Those sorts of just little micro tensions that say, you can't just assert something here and us all be bobbleheads being like, right? We're actually going to put some tension on things. So a variety of different little things. But as you say, it is the little things. It is the flossing. It's not something major.
Yeah. One of my favorites, and it's worked for several teams that I've worked with, it's called the devil's advocate approach, which Margaret Heffernan talks about in her book, Willful Blindness. And there's something about the permission to be, as one of my former bosses used to call herself, the grit in the eye. Oh. So this being in a role where your role is to ask the gnarly question.
Yeah.
And everybody takes turns in that role whenever there's a kind of difficult issue or decision.
Yeah.
Until it's normalized.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
I did a piece on the devil's advocate a long, long time ago. The devil's advocate was part of the beatification process in the Catholic Church. And so basically to become a saint, you have to have 3 miracles. And so one cardinal on rotation would be assigned the devil's advocate. And the devil's advocate's job was to question the evidence of a miracle and to say, like, are we sure that's a miracle? Are you sure that water really turned into wine? Did he have a tube down his toga? Like, that sort of thing. And it was just a quality check to make sure that somebody didn't become a saint on dodgy evidence. And in some ways, of course, the cardinal would be very happy if they were unsuccessful because it meant there was a saint. It meant miracles had happened. And I think the problem for us with devil's advocate is we've misinterpreted what it means. We think it's, I get to be the jerk, right? And that's not what it is. It's, I get to question the evidence. And actually, the other thing that specifically they did is come up with alternative explanations for the evidence that existed. And so that happened for hundreds and hundreds of years. And then under Pope John Paul II, he got rid of the devil's advocate. And what's happened is a tenfold increase in beatification, right? Now we're getting saints left, right, and center because there's nobody there anymore to test whether the evidence actually leads to that conclusion. So it's a really fun thing. But I think when you understand where it comes from and you play the role properly, it's a very useful role. When you think it's just an excuse to be a jerk, less good.
Now, it's asking the questions that we're probably all thinking, but are a bit worried about asking. I think Margaret's book is one that I recommend to many because a lot of my clients are public sector. She cites the case of Grenfell Tower. The Texas oil field disaster. So a number of where important conversations and tensions worked through.
Yeah.
Those are big prices to pay.
I got into IO psychology exclusively for one reason. In my second year of uni, I randomly took an IO class, and I think it was 1990, and it was back to Feynman. It was the case study of the Space Shuttle Challenger and how many people knew that the O-rings were vulnerable on that cold winter day and how that didn't manage to wind up in stopping the launch. That one case, because I was like a World War II history person and then that one case, I was like, I'm in, I'm hooked. Like, I need to understand that. So I would love Margaret's book for sure.
Yeah. Now, one of the causes of tension, or certainly something that I think a lot of managers now in 2026, since we head further into the 21st century, are grappling with is managing hybrid or remote teams. How do you see kind of conflict and tension and friction show up in those contexts?
So the one I hate the most is hybrid because there's a symmetry to a team that's either all physically co-located and then everybody has the same access to one another's body language and side conversations and all that kind of thing, or a team that's universally remote, in which case we have, again, a symmetrical experience to one another. It's when you have some people together and you have all the trust building and the extra layers of meaning and mirror neurons and all the humanity for part of the team and not for another part. I find the asymmetry of that really hard. When we were all in COVID and everyone was remote and we knew we had to be deliberate about difficult conversations and that sort of thing, we needed to explicitly try and understand someone's context because we didn't know their, like nobody ever knew that this is my spandex wall and that my kitchen is right behind there. They just thought this was like an actual real wall of an office. And there's contextual stuff that's important. So yeah, I think hybrid is really hard. But, making sure no matter what, that we're inviting in productive tension, that we're setting norms against friction, that we are modeling and chairing meetings effectively to promote that listening that gets deeper and validating one another, that we're tuned in to the social pain and the messages that come if we other someone or we make them feel they don't belong or they're not valued. So it's all the human stuff that happens everywhere. Now with poor fidelity communication, and then if it's hybrid, some of one, some of the other, it's the worst of both worlds, I think.
Yeah, and this assumption that not just managers, but I think lots of us make that you can just pick up and drop what you do in person, remotely. And actually, I think working remotely or having some people online and managing conversations there, in my experience, requires a bit more thought.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you can't just rock up I just think thinking it through, thinking how you're going to handle the online, or if some people are in person, it always comes back to just a bit of planning and not winging it.
Yeah.
What lessons have you learned personally about your own conflict style? I mean, I've got a big old dragon in my head, Liane, I'll be honest. What have you learned?
Yeah. So I grew up conflict avoidant, wildly conflict avoidant, a pleaser, a smoother. And it was in my first job working for a dragon. And I became a manager very young. And I felt that I couldn't protect my team from her. And I got into very high conflict debt. I'm a bit passive aggressive because I'm afraid. And so I'll talk to the wrong people about it to vent and that sort of thing. And so I got into so much conflict debt and destroyed my credit rating and had to declare bankruptcy and quit. And so I went out. I interviewed 9 times at the company that I moved to just to make good and sure that there wasn't going to be any conflict there. And it took a couple of years before it emerged, but it was there in that second conflict that I was like, oh, I can't avoid conflict and have the life I want and be the leader I want and have the career I want. So I learned that I needed to be more skillful, more deft, more willing to lean into these tensions. And that was one of the most important lessons I've ever learned. I will tell you, very many years later now, I'm no less conflict averse. I really still hate it. I'm just less conflict avoidant. I use the metaphor that it's exactly the same with exercise. I hate exercise. I've always hated exercise. I still hate exercise, but it doesn't matter whether I like exercise or not. It only matters whether I do it or not. So same is true with conflict. Still hate it, but now I do it. And so I have better abs and better relationships.
You get those reps in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And of course, better to do like a whole bunch of light reps than try and lift 175 kilos and drop it on your toe.
Nice. We're going to go into the quick fire questions now.
Okay.
I feel like you're ready. Fingers on the buzzers.
I feel like I'm ready until the quick fire question. Actually, this is a funny story. When I was in grade 8, I was on the the uni challenge, but for grade 8s. And I was up against this other team. They did the lightning round. And one of the lightning round questions to the captain of the other team was, what's the world's biggest dog? And he answered dachshund instead of Irish wolfhound. Anyway, he's now Canada's ambassador to the US.
Although I always say that there's a lot of dachshunds around here. Oh, they've got big dog energy.
They do have big dog energy. BDE, big dog energy.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. Do you realize how small you are? No.
Yeah, no, they don't.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
I love that story. So, okay, if you could change one thing about how organizations train or develop managers in handling conflict, what would it be?
Organizations need to talk about all the value that conflict brings and map that out so managers know what good looks like.
Yeah, love that. So stop spiking everyone's cortisol and anxiety levels and kind of bring it back down a notch. That conflict.
And they would get rid of the posters of rowers because I think rowing is the world's worst teamwork metaphor. Okay, keep going.
What is a myth about conflict that frustrates you?
Oh, that it means you're a bad team player, right? That it means you're doing it wrong. And that's just absolutely the wrong messaging.
And what is one management behavior that you think is fundamental to managing conflict well?
Validation. So not trying to contradict, outsmart, or even just make someone feel better. All of those things invalidate that tension that we need. And so invalidating is the behavior that at home, everywhere, when you invalidate someone, you end your privilege of having a good fight, you send it in the wrong direction.
Yeah. Wow. That's going to stay with me. Well, it's all going to stay with me, but that one is. And because we've got a lot of rich stuff here. So if there was just one thing you'd advise a manager to do after this episode, what is it?
Write down all the things in their world that are worth fighting for.
Oh, I love that. Now,
Dachshund.
I'm not going to let you go just yet because you've got your new book, which I'm really excited about. I've ordered my copy, Thoughtload. What's it about?
Yeah.
Why should people buy it?
Yeah. So the last 5 years of my work has really been noticing that work isn't working. But the narrative is constantly about how our workload is too high. And as an organizational scientist like you, right, I started looking for evidence and I'm like, I see no evidence that our workload is too high. I see plateauing and declining productivity. I talk to people on a Friday afternoon and ask them what they got done this week. And they're like, nothing. And so as I looked, I realized it's not the workload that's killing us, it's the thought load. So thought load is the invisible tax on our performance that comes from kind of everything around the work. So rising cognitive demands, how much we're expected to pay attention to in our decision fatigue. Secondly, increasing emotional burdens. And we ignore that part all the time, but we're living in an emotionally dysregulated society and it's causing really poor interactions and poor decisions in the workplace. And then the third piece, so that's the load. So increasing cognitive burdens and emotional burdens, that's the load. We're carrying that load with declining energy reserves. Like we were talking about, bad sleep. As soon as you try and carry that load after a poor night's sleep, everything feels heavier. So the new book it's really for managers and it takes you through first 12 steps to reduce your own thought load and then 12 steps to help you manage the thought load of your team. Because until we manage thought load, we're going to get people running old playbooks, no innovation. We're going to get people who aren't really present to collaborate or be there for one another. And we're going to keep having people burn out. So that's the new book. Super, super, super excited about it. So yeah, but interestingly, I'll just make one link. I was talking to my friend Kate O'Neill and she's like, what's the relationship between conflict debt and thought load? Like, what's the links between your work? And I hadn't really thought about that. But then I realized that it's because our thought load is so high that we're getting into conflict debt because we aren't paying attention to everything. We don't know what our colleagues are doing, so we can't put a productive tension on it. We're so emotionally tapped out that we can't even imagine saying something that might upset the apple cart, and we just don't have the energy. So I think what's happening, the reason these two bodies of work are coming together is that until we manage our thought load, there's no way we're going to fight the good fight. So I think there's a really clear link between the two.
I can absolutely see that. I mean, I see it in so many people that I'm working with who've just got nothing left to give.
Yeah, nothing.
And it's always interesting to me about the coaching space where so many managers and leaders, it's almost like they're like, one used the metaphor of it felt like an oxygen tank.
Yeah.
It stopped him having the bends because he was a diver. But not everyone can afford coaching and coaching isn't forever. And so it sounds like your book is going to be hugely important for helping people navigate that.
The whole idea of the book is, I was thinking about the reader sort of drowning in their head going below the water. And so the book is written, it's both with my editor and the designer of the book, it's written to be buoyant. It's just supposed to be the life ring to get your head above water. As you read it, you will find it buoyant, right? Just help me feel like I can get my head above water. Everything, no chapters more than like 4 pages. Like it's all built to be like that oxygen tank, that relief, that feeling like you've got a coach right there for you. So that's the goal.
So those of you listening in, the book is already available wherever you buy your books. And I would absolutely encourage you to go get a copy of Thoughtload, but also get a copy of The Good Fight as well, because it's amazing. Liane, you've been amazing. I've loved our conversation. I could talk to you for hours.
I'll come over there and we'll find a nice patio at a pub somewhere and we will talk for hours.
Walk the Seven Sisters.
Yes, let's do it.
Lovely. Okay, thank you so much, Liane.
Thanks, Haley.
And speak to you soon. So there you have it. The wonderful Dr. Liane Davey. I don't know about you, I took so much from that episode that conflict doesn't need to be something for us to be fearful of. And I don't think I will ever look at dragons the same way again. That's going to stay with me for a long time. So I really hope you got something out of that episode. I think Liane is so wise and practical more than anything else. I mean, she comes with a wealth of experience of helping teams navigate through this kind of stuff. So I hope you learned from her as much as I learned from her, really. I encourage you to embrace your dragon and think about what treasures are you protecting. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Now, you've heard the one thing I suggested you do, but maybe there's something else you're inspired to do on the back of today's episode. So here's my question. If there was just one thing you'll do following this episode, what is it? Note it down, or even better, tell someone. Now, I love it when you comment and tell me the things you've been inspired to try after an episode, or even when you send me through a problem you want help with. So please email me at halopsychpod@gmail.com, and the email is in the show notes. Did you enjoy this episode? Then please show your love by leaving a review and giving it a rating. It really helps other people to find my podcast. Thank you once again. And in the meantime, go and manage with confidence.